Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Diversity and Exclusion and Implicit Bias, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you could join us. My name is Michelle Wilcox and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discussed can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I'll be sharing this URL with you in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation, coming back in. We do not control the audio, your devices do. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume on your settings device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again at the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using your chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we are offering a mandatory preventing sexual harassment training in English on June 11th this year. With that, let's begin today's webinar. Our presenter today is Diana Cano. Diana has over 20 years of professional human resource experience. Diana is a subject matter expert in the full spectrum of human resource management. Diana has held progressively responsible positions with public sector, special district, and private sector employers. Diana has notable experience in strategic human resources planning, performance management, staffing, succession planning, employment law compliance, employment contract negotiations, employee benefits, compensation and payroll, training and development, and human resources coaching/mentoring. In 2021, Diana decided to start her own human resources consulting business, where she has been able to deliver human resources solutions and a wide range of human resource policies and procedures, documents, and recruitment activities to various businesses. Diana looks forward to using her HR expertise in assisting the webinar attendees today. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you, Diana. And again, welcome everybody.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that, Michelle. So I'll go ahead and begin by providing some information to you regarding the diversity, inclusion, and implicit bias. The information that I'm going to be presenting is, general information. It's not intended to present an overview of employment practices. It also, the written and the verbal contents of this presentation are not intended to constitute consulting and/or advice, and no client relationship is established between the presenter and the attendees. Okay, so today what we are going to be covering is what diversity is, if there really is bias, and is it an issue here in the workplace, and then how to move past bias and encourage others to do the same. We also will be talking a little bit about fostering an environment of inclusion, and then at the end, as Michelle stated, there will be some questions or opportunity to ask questions. So one of the first polling questions is, your company champions diversity and inclusion in all aspects of employment. So answer to yourself if this is A, true, we've got it all figured out, B, false, we've got it all wrong, C, maybe, sometimes we get it right, but there's still work to do. And D, I don't know.
Sorry about that. I should have taken it over, but we kind of skipped quickly. Okay, it looks like we've got a bunch of people that are already voting. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here, but it looks like the majority are saying maybe sometimes we get it right, but there's work to do. There's 75% voted, so I'm going to close this and share the results, and we'll continue on.
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty common response, I think, especially with everything changing, the workforce changing, companies changing in terms of what their mission statements are and goals are. It's going to be an evolving, constantly situation where things, there's probably always work to do. So the concept of diversity is about acceptance and respect. What it means is that you don't have to understand every person, but you do have to understand that every person is different. But in a lot of ways, people are the same. So in a workplace so basically what it is and the goal would be is to have a workplace that provides a place for women, for veterans, for LGBTQ employees, a place for people of color, people with disabilities, working parents, and any others to connect and help ensure that the workplace welcomes them and supports their productivity to the same common goal. We do have a number of systems and workplaces that allow for this. We've got hybrid schedules that happen. There's access to employees virtually, also in person. The concept of diversity is about learning to understand yourself and other people so that we can all work together for the same common goal. It's about how we view the world and how not to see things the same way. I'm sorry, and how not everyone sees things the same way. So one of the things to understand is that human beings are ethnocentric. That's like that's why when you may share a lot of similarities with the friends that you choose. However, at work we don't have the opportunity to pick our coworkers. We don't get to pick our boss or the CEO. So in these cases, we need to understand that we need to understand our own programming before we can understand others. So our life experiences may have shaped us into the person that we are, good or bad. And no matter how different we are, we still share one thing that's in common, and that's our own human experience. If we are a manager, we have the opportunity to pick our team. But what happens if we pick people who all look different, but think just like you? So when we look at problems, diversity does matter. If we have different backgrounds and perspectives, we see problems differently and can come up with some creative solutions. We learn from other experience. We also can learn from others' experiences. We can learn to see the world in a different way. I remember traveling abroad one time, luckily I was prepared beforehand, and I was going to Japan. And if someone gives you a business card, it's disrespectful to tuck it into your pocket or put it inside your briefcase, which would be very normal here in the United States. But the expectation is that you keep it in front of you the entire time that you're in a meeting. Had I not done my research, I could have easily offended someone. So different cultures may have different programming and different expectations. Some of the definitions that we want to talk about is diversity. So that's people or the quantitative experience. We have inclusion, which is the qualitative experience. So basically the environment that people are in. We have implicit bias, which is unconscious beliefs that form our judgments, decisions, and behaviors. And then there's diversity and inclusion can easily just be more buzzwords or acts of political correctness that we check off a box. But the value of diversity cannot be recognized without the component of inclusion. So bias in the workplace, it's important to understand the purposeful or accidental assumptions that are made when hiring candidates, delegating tasks or comparing employees in other ways. In most cases, bias is either conscious or unconscious, both of which require awareness and training to combat. So the conscious bias is an active, it's understood and calculated choice to act in a certain way. And with conscious bias, you're aware of the decisions that you're making and you know what's motivating them. Unconscious bias also is called implicit bias. It's a behavior or an action or an inaction to perform unconsciously. So unlike conscious behavior, people who exhibit unconscious bias have no idea they're acting in a way that favors some people and excludes others. And since it's often unrecognizable to the person demonstrating it, unconscious bias may be very challenging to combat without effective training. So we've done some surveys. The Deloitte survey indicated that 64% of the workers that were surveyed felt that they had experienced bias in their workplace during the last year. And of those, 61% felt that they experienced bias in the workplace at least once a month. And of the majority who felt that they witnessed or experienced bias in the past year, 83% characterize it as indirect and subtle, compared to 32% who characterize the bias to be blatant and obvious. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a slide, and I'm going to show it to you quickly, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what you saw.
So on the previous slide, I saw good, evil, both good and evil. And I'll let the folks, give them a few minutes here to put their votes in. I usually like to wait until we're at least at 70%. So bear with us. Okay, it looks like 63% said good and 34% said both.
Oh, that was interesting. So I wanted to show you this slide here. This is basically the same gentleman. Oops, I wanted to go back. The point about how you saw the first slide, some of you saw good and some of you saw both good and evil. First impressions often determine, how we perceive another person. So for example, a candidate for a position who has a very strong first impression is likely going to be evaluated more favorably, even if it is unwarranted. They don't have to work as hard, I guess, to prove themselves. And one of the things that we also notice is the science of people tells us that most people make a first impression within 7 seconds. So experiments by Princeton researchers had suggested that people make judgments of others within 1/10 of a second. We use things like race, perceived sexual orientation, accents, clothing, maybe the firmness of a handshake to basically tell us about warmth or even competence. And it's amazing to see that it only takes 7 seconds for us to come up with an impression. The preconceived notions and beliefs are based on limited experience and what we've heard secondhand. They're seldom neutral, but often have a negative connotation. Even if the assumptions were positive, they can be just as detrimental to the individual or to the group. So think about this. What are your assumptions about, like, let's just say, for instance, a used car salesman or politicians, or New Yorkers? What comes to mind? What do you tend to expect from them? So the non-rational or logical is how you can possibly know a person will behave in a certain way in certain circumstances. Only through the direct experience with that individual, and even then, people can surprise you. And then if you're resistant to change, so once opinions are formed, it can be extremely difficult to change. Things like, don't bother me with the facts because I already know. A self-fulfilling prophecy, what we think becomes real. We look for behavior that validates our beliefs. People start performing to the level expected of them. Thrives on generalization with limited experience and not based on evidence, but hearsay. The two-sided coin, victims and perpetrators, strong and emotional response from both. So stereotypes, thrive on generalization. Think about it. What comes to mind when I say, hey, used car salesman? We may think of words like swindlers or sleazy or crooked or pushy. Sure, there's many, there may be some that are dishonest, used car salespeople, that is. But the whole industry in and of itself is not a bad industry. But we think about how these stereotypes are perpetrated through, TVs, movies, etc. So, the question is, how do we think all of this got started? Some interacted with shady people, and then told their friends, and then things became self-fulfilling prophecy. So the question is it implicit bias? Reflexivity, laughing at an offensive joke, thinking that overweight person shouldn't be eating that. Having an uncomfortable reaction when you see two people of the same sex showing affection. Refusing to make eye contact with a young male of color. Hiring a younger candidate who is more familiar with technology than an older candidate who may be more experienced in the field. So some of the misinterpretations, we describe what we see, we interrupt the behavior, we make a judgment. There was a science experiment that was done to test people's interpretation of visual cues. People who were given eyeglasses, which turned the world upside down. They had to suffer with an upside down image for about a week or two. But after that, their brains learned to turn the images back over again, so they were seeing things right side up. The same thing happens when you hear something that we know is wrong, our brain fixes it. So given our tendency to hear what we expect to hear, it's very easy for people that are in conflict to misunderstand each other. So communication is already likely to be strained, and people will most likely want to hide the truth to some extent. The potential for misperceptions and misunderstandings becomes high. Cultural is behavioral software. So how do we learn about misconceptions? We have to understand our culture. So culture works like a computer software. It takes in information and produces a response, often without consulting the user. So without the software, a computer is just, a 20-pound paperweight. Culture also consists of unwritten rules. Without them, we wouldn't know how to handle new situations. They're just absorbed unconsciously. It directs the most subtle aspects of behavior, when we smile, when it's okay to interrupt. So remember the first time when you went to a friend's house for dinner and they served something that you had never seen before? What do? Do you eat it anyways? Most of us are taught that it's the polite thing to do. How about riding in an elevator? When the elevator door closes, we wait for others to get off and then we get on. We all turn around and face towards the door, but what if you got in and turned the opposite way and faced to the back? Would that be strange for yourself or for others? So once we recognize what our programming teaches us, we have the capacity to control our choices. So it's like sending a Microsoft document to a Macintosh or an Apple user. You have to make some adjustments so that they can read it. And if you know in advance, then you know how you can do that. So here's the situation. Late one night, a man was searching for something in the parking lot. And he was on his hands and knees. He was crawling around a bright circle of light that was created by the street lamp, similar to what you see here. A woman happens to be passing by and she stops. She takes a look at the scene and she asks, what are you looking for? Can I help you? And the gentleman says, I'm looking for my keys. Any chance you've seen them? And she said, okay, so you dropped them right around here? And he responded to her. He said, oh no, I dropped them way over there. And then the question became, well, then why are you looking over here? And the man paused and he had to consider the question. And all he knew was just that it was because the light was there. So moving past the bias is more than you are exposed. Moving past the bias is your experience of where you are more exposed to various stereotypes, the stronger the unconscious association becomes. So bias causes people to rely on assumptions to inform how they read and react to various situations. The more you're exposed to stereotypes, the stronger your unconscious association becomes. So this affects our quick decision making, those that have to be made right away. That's why it's helpful to kind of slow things down, take the time to make important decisions. How you feel in the moment isn't necessarily the answer. This goes back to that science again. Back when we were in our survival instinct, we didn't have the luxury of time. When we were confronted by the saber-toothed tiger, we had to fight it or we had to run away from it. So when we have to make quick decisions, we're in that area of our brain that thrives on generalizations and stereotypes. So it takes time and attention to get out of that part of our brain and into what is known as the higher order of thinking or our critical thinking stage. That's where you can actually analyze and question what is actually occurring. So sometimes we get triggered and it puts us back into that fight or that flight mode. We go back into that primal stance. We're ready to fight. blame others, assign meanings based on our hard wiring. So that's when empathy becomes diminished. We're only thinking about ourselves, we're being selfish. So nowadays, people, we have people who are transgender and they identify themselves as non-binary, which means they don't view themselves as either a male or a female. So they'll ask you to use a they or a them pronoun when you're referring to them. This is probably not feeling normal to some, because in the English language, they or them refers to multiple people. It may be a natural way to feel the difficulty of this, using the correct pronouns when referring to this person. But have you ever stopped to think about, how hard it is for them? Obviously, the discomfort that you might feel by trying to remember to use the correct pronouns is far less in comparison than the person that may be feeling that may feel like they're a transgender. So once you understand kind of the situational nature of stereotypes and bias, you actually learn that you have power over it. It puts you back into that higher, more complex critical thinking region of your brain. So what if you're evaluating a job candidate to lead a new office? And on paper, this by far is the more qualified person you've ever seen. Her responses to your interview questions are flawless. She has impeccable social skills. Still, something doesn't feel right. You can't put your finger on what, you just have this sense.
So we'll go into a polling question. So are you going to give this candidate a chance? A, no, I'm going to go with my gut. B, yes, I'm going to give her a chance. Or C, I don't know. Well, that's a good question. Okay, we're going to give it a couple more minutes here. So it looks like majority says yes, I'm going to give her a chance. I'll share those results with you and you can speak on that.
Yeah, so that's probably the best answer. Just a little bit about me and where I was raised. I was raised in like a part of, I'm from Fresno, so I was raised in a part of Fresno, through junior high. And then after that, I was raised in kind of like the central part of Fresno, where the neighborhood was a little bit nicer, if you will. And then after college, I ended up having to work like in downtown Fresno, where there was another group of people. I've worked in government, so I was a true, civil servant to the public, and I consistently had to be aware of the cultural differences and individuals. So when you're making decisions about candidates in this case, you should be encouraged to break that decision down. Think about, are you hiring for a fit, and is this candidate not it? Sometimes the candidate's profile or image or personal brand maybe doesn't fit with what you or the hiring manager has in mind for the role. It doesn't mean that they're not competent or they're not capable. It just means that there's a different vision of who they wanted before even meeting anyone. Do you or the hiring manager have a specific person in mind that they really wanted to hire all along? I mean, that does happen. Sometimes there's an internal candidate or someone that was referred for the job by an insider who basically was already a clear front runner for the position. Did they make a bad, first impression? We mentioned before, we decide a person within 7 seconds of meeting them. Does this candidate, remind you of someone? Do they resemble the bully, that used to pick on you when you pick on you or the hiring manager when you were back in high school? Do they look like someone you've had issues with managing in the past? The main point is to kind of break down your decision and make sure that you're hiring or passing a candidate for the right reason, and you could explain and justify that. Sometimes awareness is not enough, but you have to do something about it. So your work has to be conscientious and it has to be intentional. We know what works when it's evaluated, and in ourselves, we can continue to test that. So some of the things that, we do is we identify instances where implicit biases may be impacting your behavior. So be specific, like always baking with your daughter or playing basketball with your son. And it's just a layer of how we identify ourselves. If we want to act friendlier, our behavior is gonna influence our thoughts by acting friendlier. We want to be aware of our positive stereotypes. So they may seem harmless, but they can still register as offensive to those on the receiving end. We want to hang out with people with expanded viewpoints so that we could continually learn the different cultures and different perceptions of situations. We want to expose ourselves to the media that aims to break down that prejudice. Make your circle bigger, have positive contact with equal status, working together. And then try not to make quick decisions, slow down, take the time, use, algorithms, examine where your reactions are coming from. So some of the things that we should do is basically have like a fast check of ourselves. The best thing that we could do is ask ourselves questions instead of assigning our own meaning. So most people will not be offended if you genuinely want to understand. You would watch your tone, of course, but so that you don't come off like you're accusing or you're blaming, you obviously need to watch your body language. But we want to start, with something that shows that we actually have a desire and we actually want to learn. So start with that open mind and invite conversations by asking questions out of respect. It could be something like, hey, I noticed that when we were talking, you didn't look at me in the eye. The way that I was raised, that would have been a sign of dishonesty. But I don't want to make assumptions or anything. So can you tell me, why when you were talking that you wouldn't look directly in my eye? So it's always good to kind of explain yourself and give an example and pose a question that actually invites a response, a welcome response. So, I will say sometimes it doesn't go well, but sometimes it will. But just because it backfires, on you, it doesn't mean that you give up. You keep trying. In the meantime, keep a positive intent in mind, stay curious, ask those questions. And as you do this, you actually become that role model. You learn to inspire others to connect across the divides through your example. You continue to seek to learn even in those tough situations, and you encourage others to do the same, because every situation is not going to be easy. There will be misunderstandings, but if others see you as someone who's willing to try, they're more likely to try as well. And so, when we're confronting bias in the workplace, we have to learn to recognize it, and we have to make that invisible visible. this could be done now, or could this be done now, or should it wait until later? In cases where it needs to be done later, we want to disarm the situation. We want to educate the person by shifting from the intent of what the person intended to the impact of the comment. So here is kind of how we learn how to identify and address our own biases, and how do we confront the bias, and really not just in the workplace, but in any situation. How should we respond when we recognize and witness someone making an offensive comment? So obviously it would depend, right? But it depends on what it is, and who said it, and who said it to who, and what the circumstances or the environment that you're in as well. So speaking from the place of an ally and someone with privilege, I might need to start off with by saying that in order to respond appropriately, we have to first be able to recognize a microaggression, which is what we had talked about the previous month. It's what we are in learning of in these webinars and that we attend. And it's what we have been learning about in our United Way sessions. So as we grow in our own culture and competency and develop our awareness, we become better, and we become better in recognizing microaggressions and biased comments. We learn how to avoid them and ultimately respond appropriately to them. So one of the first things that we need to do is, when we hear a comment and it's fueled by implicit bias, we have to make it the invisible visible. So as you know, the person who made the comment is unaware that they made an offensive comment. So you need to make it visible to them. And maybe this could be done immediately. Maybe it needs to wait until a later time when you're able to be one-on-one with the individual. And if it needs to wait to a later time, there's ways that you could disarm the microaggression by maybe steering the conversation away from the remark or the joke, that's offensive. You'd be modeling good behavior to the other people that are present, and then you could have a conversation later with the person who made the comment. When you do respond to the bias, whether that be immediately or later, you want it to come from a place of education. So you want to keep it about the impact that the comment had, not the intent of the comment. So the impact supersedes the intent. You can't prove the intent, so you will lose in that argument. But how many times have you said to someone that the way they said something was offensive, and they responded with, well, that wasn't my intention at all. So why are you being so sensitive, or something similar to that? So focusing on the impact is easier. It's an easier way to get a person to understand what actually happened and how they may have caused the pain. Another way to get people to understand what they said may come from just a place of bias. And so you want to ask them to be more specific about the remark. That is something that may come up, that's something that may come up and work more often, especially with hiring committees or deliberations about a candidate, or even just a friendly office conversation. So inclusion is the practice of providing everyone with equal access to opportunities and resources. The efforts include creating opportunities for historically marginalized groups, a means to be equal in the workplace. Companies with more ethnically and gender diverse executive teams are more likely to outperform their competition. Glassdoor, there was a survey found that 76% of the employees and job seekers consider diversity to be an important element of their workplace, which affects recruitment and retention. So inclusion requires a buy-in from everyone, and it needs to be an intentional priority in the heart of the company. It comes basically from the top down. So any organization that's going to work on being inclusive needs to start with the leaders first. This has to be the buy-in. Human resources, in and of itself cannot do this alone. So the work has to be strategic and it has to be intentionally priority. So even when we set out to on this journey together, we are going to be making people maybe feel uncomfortable. So for instance, think back, to your first job. Maybe you were working in retail or at a fast food place. The old boss, had their favorites, right? The ones who would also, you felt like always got the best shifts, or they were able to take longer breaks. Maybe there was a click. It just seemed that they were always able to go above the rules. They always got to work together, and which created distances with other workers. So this, as we know, would be what we would feel to be a hostile work environment. But people were treated differently, and it was basically impossible to raise these concerns because there was the feeling that the boss didn't care. So inclusion in the workplace, it's about tackling all of these kinds of problems and creating teams that are more connected and helping you identify your office and understanding what the office may be guilty of, and then knowing what to do about it. I have a quote here. We can give employees special treatment. So all employees, deserve a workplace that enables them to feel welcome, to do their best. Characterizing the accommodations as special treatment reinforces the stigma for individuals with disabilities by describing their needed accommodations as a burden or an exception to the rule. Equality versus equity. So some of the tools to be aware of, culture is an experience based. So it doesn't always grow in your skin or your hair or where you're born. Challenge assumptions. Check your reality, be flexible. Assume positive intent. Most people don't get up in the morning thinking about, how am I gonna offend somebody today? We have to generate multiple interpretations. So, crossed arms, lack of eye contact, nodding. These could all mean different things. It's a difference that makes a difference. Is it a difference that makes a difference? So when you're considering individuals of different age, gender, ethnicity, education, could they have a good idea? Can they lift that 20-pound box or that 50-pound box? Should I offer them, should I offer to shake their hands, or should I help them get that promotion? Does their paperwork have priority over someone else's? Harvard actually has what they call an implicit bias test. There are ways that you as an individual or as a company could have an assessment done on bias, whether it's unconscious or conscious. it allows kind of, I guess, a way to discover those hidden cognitive biases. So I think most people are aware of their own overt biases, but sometimes it's difficult for us to become aware of covert biases. So this is an example, or it's excellent in terms of showing bias and how it drives our day-to-day decision making. It helps all of us, basically from all backgrounds, recognize these hidden biases that may unknowingly distort our objective evaluation and treatment of others based upon race, gender, religion, or culture. This tool, I believe, was developed by a group of researchers from Harvard and has been proven to be essentially a good test. There is a link there that if you decide to take it. I do know that the test is free and the results are confidential, but I do believe they research that you would be tagged for their research purposes. And I have kind of like a final saying. There are 3 things that you should know about pre-screening before a candidate progresses through a hiring process. So be not the slave of your own past, plunge into the sublime seas, dive deep, and swim far. So you shall come back with new self-respect, with new power, and with an advanced experience that shall explain and overlook the old. And that's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So think about when you're pre-screening candidates as they go through the hiring process, their ambition, their ability, their commitment. Focus on these things to determine, the difference between high performers and high potentials. And pretty much as the saying goes, if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. And with those questions, you'll have a better idea or understanding of why maybe certain people are passed for selections that maybe somebody otherwise would not agree.
Well, thank you, Diana. That was very informative. We do have a question. Somebody would like further elaboration on the equality versus equity.
Well, the quality it goes back to the company that you're working for, and the quality of the people, what they bring to the organization.
Okay. Somebody had a comment saying that what they've learned to do is to be quick to listen and slow to speak. Equality, there's still some confusion on the equality versus equity. And
well, equity is specific to an individual or maybe, to a group of people that have the same kind of resource, maybe are given the same amount of opportunities, and recognizing that they all have different circumstances that they have different circumstances, but they need to all reach the and overcome the same, produce the same outcome. And it gets confusing.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and so one of the person actually, I think there's just some confusion, and so sorry about that, you guys. So equality, here's what they have asked. Equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities need to reach out an equal outcome. Yes. So I guess I'm still not, I guess the question is, she wants, or they want the definition, equality simply means everyone is treated the same exact way, regardless or need or any other individual difference. So I guess there's just different viewpoints about this. And what I'll do is I'm going to stay online here just for a couple more minutes, and I'll get that question. I'll reach out and get further information on what the exact question is, and then we can, I will even email that to you, Diana, so you can answer off screen. But in the meantime, we will send the information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of this presentation on our website. And we really appreciate you all for attending today's webinar. Thank you, Diana, for your time and expertise today. We hope all the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on February 20th for our employment law update webinar. And feel free to, once we send the thank you email out, feel free to ask any other questions that you might have, and we'll address those individually. And so we just really appreciate everybody's time today, and thank you and have a safe day.
Thank you.